and it's a decisive week ahead as Kyiv hopes to secure continued support from the U.S. and NATO as it tries to fight off Russia. On Friday, Ukraine's leader Volodymyr Zelenskyy will meet with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Conference. But first up, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth will be attending meetings in Brussels later on Wednesday. His boss, Donald Trump, has already vowed to end the war in Ukraine and has questioned U.S. security commitments from Europe, which is clearly worrying allies.
When U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth attends the NATO ministerial, he'll be bringing the White House's skepticism of the transatlantic defense alliance with him. He and his boss, President Donald Trump, are looking for no less than a renegotiation of the U.S.'s relationship to NATO.
You know, NATO has to pay more money. NATO has to pay 5%. We're in the Ukraine war by $200 billion more than NATO. It's ridiculous because it affects them a lot more. We have an ocean in between.
In their view, European security is a European responsibility, and so is financing Ukraine's defense. Experts say that while the U.S. may stop short of pulling out of the alliance, pulling back is much more likely. The open question is, by how much? Would Washington, for example, reduce U.S. troops in Germany? European allies may want to find a deal with Trump in order to maintain the status quo, for example, by buying more U.S. weapons. But could there really be a deal that would override Trump's negative attitude towards NATO?
Here at NATO headquarters in Brussels, European allies are anxiously awaiting their first encounter with the new U.S. Secretary of Defense. They seem determined to avoid any friction. Or, as one diplomat told us, nobody wants this to be a shouting match. So don't expect them to focus too much on Trump's threats against Greenland, but rather to welcome his call to dramatically boost Europe's defense spending.
We have to ramp up defense spending, we have to ramp up defense production. The exact level of defense spending we will decide later this year based on the capability targets, but it will be considerably higher than 2%.
And still, spending 5% of GDP on defense seems out of reach for many NATO countries in Europe. And ramping up support for Ukraine without the US, rather inconceivable. So the Europeans may not be able to offer Trump a quick win, but they are hoping to persuade the new US administration that being part of such a strong alliance is to their advantage, whether they deal with Russia or with China.
DW correspondent Karolina Shamoy is reporting from Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, and joins us now. Karolina, what do we know about the current negotiations between the Trump administration and Kyiv? Has Ukraine put anything on the table in exchange for Washington's support?
They certainly have, Michael. There are three key points that we're hearing about during these negotiations, these conversations between a group of Ukrainians who are already there in Washington at the White House, apparently having this negotiation talks with officials over there. The first point is the exchange of territories. President Zelenskyy said also yesterday during an interview with The Guardian that Ukraine would be willing to give up their battlefield gains in Kursk. This is originally Russian territory, in exchange of Ukrainian occupied territories. That means territories where the Russian military is based right now in the eastern side of the country. This, of course, if Russia agrees to peace negotiations. The second point is about business and economics. President Zelenskyy said it's not only about security, but also about money, and that they would be willing to offer their valuable natural resources, meaning rare earths, like, for example, lithium, to U.S. companies, and that this would, of course, also create jobs for American companies. This is how Zelenskyy is trying to make this attractive for the current U.S. administrations, to offer them a kind of a win-win situation. And the third important point during these conversations, Michael, is the conscription age. Right now, the age for young Ukrainian men to be drafted into military service is 24. 24. And the US administration has been asking already for a couple of weeks for this age to be lowered to 18. And now President Zelenskyy is offering a special contract for young Ukrainian men between 18 and 24 to earn up to 1 million hryvnia a year. This is about 25,000 US dollars if they go to fight at the front line. There are also other special services that they would get, like, for example, free education.
In an interview with the British newspaper The Guardian, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said that Europe cannot guarantee Ukraine's security without the U.S. What is the sense there? What would be the consequences of the U.S. turning its back on Ukraine?
Many fear this scenario, Michael, because the U.S. is one of the biggest donors, is the biggest donors, actually, the biggest supporter for Ukraine with military aid during this conflict. And they are also saying that European countries and the European Union has to get together and be the donor number one, because this fight, this war is taking place in Ukrainian territory. So this is why the meeting right now in Brussels is really crucial.
That's DW's Karolina Chamoy in Kyiv. Thank you, Karolina.
Well, you saw DW's Brussels Bureau Chief, Alexandra von Naumann, in that report. She joins us now. Welcome, Alexandra. So talk us through the different and competing interests at play in these meetings.
Well, the biggest problem, Phil, I think, is that the Europeans have been hearing a lot of statements coming out of the White House with Donald Trump criticizing NATO countries for not spending enough on defense, with him saying that the war in Ukraine is Europe's business because it's affecting Europe's security. And now NATO officials here and diplomats are saying, yeah, we heard those statements, but we still don't know what is the plan here. What is the US plan for NATO? Do they want to stay engaged? Do they want to stay committed to NATO? What is Trump's plan for Ukraine? Many here are saying, telling us that they feel that the new US administration does not have a plan to end the war in Ukraine. So this meeting here at NATO headquarters, but also all the other meetings taking place this week, are all about getting to know what the new position of the US administration really is, what do they want from their European partners, and it's also about finding out whether there is a possibility for a joint approach for continuing working together.
Well, meanwhile, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has told the British newspaper The Guardian that Europe cannot guarantee Ukraine's security without the US. What did he mean by that?
Well, it's not the first time that he said that, and obviously he's stating the obvious, because for Ukraine, of course, it is important that they are either a NATO member or that they have robust security guarantees should there be a deal with Russia. To maintain the peace, they need the support of the alliance as NATO member or of all the allies individually. And we have to acknowledge that the US still has the largest armed forces in NATO. They are the only nation that maintains and controls the conventional and neutral capability to deter and defend the alliance and the allied territory from attacks from outside NATO. So, of course, everyone is looking towards the US for support, and that is why Ukraine is, and the Ukrainian president is also talking about that.
And a very brief word about how European countries feel about the increasing likelihood that Ukraine will have to swap or surrender territory to Russia as part of peace negotiations.
Some of them are, of course, pushing back strongly against that, because the war is about Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. But, of course, all of them understand that Ukraine will need to have successful talks with Russia. They would need to agree maybe to give up some of their territories in eastern part of the country. But the most important issue for the Europeans is that there will be no peace deal against Ukraine and its interest, and nothing will be decided above the heads of the Europeans, because, of course, it is also about their security.
Thanks, Alexandra. DW's Alexandra von Naumann in Brussels.
Thank you.